In this lesson, we'll create the material for the fuzz that we just added. Let's begin. Now that we have some fuzz added to the fox, it's time to make sure that the colors match the texture underneath. This will not only make the fuzz make a lot more sense for the model it's attached to, but it will also make it appear more dense due to the gaps between each hair being less obvious. So first, let's switch to the shading workspace so that we can begin creating the material. We can find the shading workspace found here at the very top center. We'll also want to switch this top viewport to the rendered mode by clicking this button here found on the far right. You can use your mouse wheel here at the top to zoom into the head to get a better look. Okay, so now we're ready to begin creating this material. One thing to note is I won't be covering every single aspect of creating materials in this lesson. However, you should be able to follow along just fine if you're unfamiliar. I won't be skipping any steps during my explanation, I just won't be going over every single detail as we go. If you'd like to learn more about the ins and outs of material creation in Blender, I'd highly recommend my Magic of Materials class found on Skillshare. We go over all the basics of material creation in Blender from a complete beginner's perspective, while texturing a pre-made wizard study file. With that out of the way, let's begin. First, you'll need to make sure that you have this short fuzz object selected from this list here on the top right. So we'll go over here, we can scroll up in this list until we find the fox head object, twirl open this arrow next to it, and then make sure you have short fuzz selected. Now down here in this bottom viewport, we're going to check on this button here that says Use Nodes. This will add 2 placeholder nodes for us to begin editing if we want to. For those unfamiliar with this node editor at the bottom, we can zoom in and out using our mouse wheel. You can also click in the mouse wheel to pan it left and right, just to slide the view back and forth. Typically, after adding these placeholder nodes, you'd either edit this principled BSDF node found here to make the hair a specific color, or you'd add new nodes to adjust the missing properties. In our case, we're actually going to be copying the vast majority of the nodes from a different material and simply reusing them for the fuzz material. Specifically, we'll be copying the nodes from the material currently applied to the fox's head object to save ourselves a lot of work. Let's start by selecting the fox's head over here on the right side. We can just select it here in the list. And now down here in this bottom viewport, we can zoom out using our mouse wheel. And then we're going to drag select over all of these nodes here to the left of this green one. So we want all of these nodes selected right here. We won't actually be using all of these nodes, but it'll be easy for us to just delete the unwanted nodes later. Now with these nodes selected, we can hit Control and C to make sure that we copy them. And then we'll go over here and select the short fuzz object from the list so we can switch back to this object instead. And then we're going to hover our mouse over this bottom viewport and hit Control and V to paste those nodes that we just copied. After you paste them, select any one of these nodes here at the top. So if you select on the top color bar of any one of these nodes, you can just click and drag it and then move it over here to the left. So we want it left of this green node. Before we hook up these new nodes, let's remove the ones that we don't need first. So we're just going to go through each one of these and delete any node that we don't need. So first I deselected by just clicking off into this gray area first. Make sure I don't have anything selected. Now we can select this node and hit delete on our keyboard. We can select this node, hit delete. We can select this node here on the far left, delete it. And then lastly, we're going to click and drag over this little tiny dot here. So at the bottom of this purple line, we want to select just this dot here, and then we'll hit delete again to remove that. Okay, so now let's reconnect these nodes. I'm going to zoom in over here on the left side. We can click from this little purple dot on the side of this node and drag it to this purple dot. And then lastly, we'll go over here and drag from this yellow dot to this yellow dot. Now that we have everything connected, let's also take a moment to get everything compact a bit more. Right now it's all kind of spread out. And again, we can just drag select over things and then click at the top of any one of these and just move them around, get everything a little bit more tidy, less spread out, and just make it easier to work on this material. Okay, so now with all this setup out of the way, we have one new node to add. So hovering over this bottom viewport, we're going to hit Shift and A to bring up our add menu, go to search, and then we're going to type in attribute. So ATT should be enough to bring it up. We're going to choose attribute from the top of the list, and then place it here to the left of this purple node here on the bottom. Now we can zoom in where we just placed this new node, and we're going to click from this purple dot on vector and drag it over here to this purple dot next to vector on this node. The reason we added this node is to make sure that each hair pulls the correct color from the surface it's attached to below on the fox's head. You'll notice right now that the fuzz is primarily orange regardless of where it's attached. So if we zoom in here, we'll see that even in this white area, this fuzz is still orange. And that's because it doesn't know which color to pull from, and it's pulling from the wrong area. This attribute node that we just added will force Blender to use the correct color for each hair by telling it to use the same UV unwrap for the fur as the head. In basic terms, the UV for an object just determines how a texture is displayed on the object. So it tells it exactly where to place each pixel of the texture. We want to pull from this information to tell the fur which color to be. So to do this, we're going to go over here to this attribute node, and then down here where it says name, we're going to click on this name box. And now we need to type in some very specific text. So you'll have to follow along here, and I will put it up on screen so you can see exactly what I'm typing. So we're going to type surface, all lowercase, underscore, UV, underscore, coordinate, and then hit enter. And by typing in this text down here in the name box, we've told Blender to specifically look at the UV coordinates for the surface that it's attached to. And you will have to make sure that you have it typed in exactly as I have it here. After typing this text in, you'll immediately notice that the hair now matches the color of the surface that it's attached to. So anything here in white shows white hair, and then over here where it's orange or darker brown, you can see that the hair now matches this color. We're nearly done with this material already, but just for the sake of understanding, let's discuss the most important nodes in this material, just so you have a better understanding of what's happening. So if we zoom out here so that we can see the whole material, this orange node found here, named Fox Head Base Color 01, is the hand-painted texture that I made for the fox's head. This is where all the colors you see on the head are coming from. I painted this texture directly inside Blender using the Texture Paint workspace. And now if we zoom out, all of these nodes here on the top are devoted to adding a felt texture on top of this hand-painted texture that we just discussed down here on the bottom. This helps vary the colors a bit more on this hand-painted texture and ensures that if we ever see between the gaps in the fuzz, it still looks like there are small fibers below the surface. If you zoom in here on the fox's head, we can see an example of that here. So you can see all these crisscrossing lines and dark patterns. This is that fuzz pattern that I've placed on top of the hand-painted texture. Okay, so we have a few more changes and then we're done. So I'm going to zoom out here so we can see a bit more of the head. And then down here in this bottom viewport, we're going to zoom in here on this green node called Principled BSDF. This large green node here is generally responsible for the surface properties of this material. So think of things like how see-through it is or how reflective it is. That kind of thing is what we control here. We're going to change this IOR value found here near the top. So we'll click on this and we'll set it to 1.3 and then hit enter. This value controls how reflective the material is. In our case, we don't want these hairs to be too shiny and reflective, so we're going to lower this value slightly. Now we're going to move down this list until we see this section here called transmission. So we'll twirl this open and we have one slider in here. We're going to set this weight slider to 0.5 and then hit enter. This setting controls how see-through your material is. It's typically used to make things like glass. We're using this setting to make our hair a little bit see-through, so it catches the light in a more realistic way. We did limit this effect to 50% though, as we don't want the hair too transparent. We can see an example of this here. If we zoom in, we'll notice that these hairs in the back here are catching light and allowing the light to shine through them because they are partially see-through. And now before we call this material done, we do have one more setting to change regarding the way that the fur receives light. And this actually won't be changed inside the material itself. So we're done in this workspace for now. To get a good idea of why this change is going to be important, first let's head over to the rendering workspace. We can find that here at the top. So before we do any rendering here, first make sure that you're set to slot 1 found here at the top right. You can see all these different slots here. You want to be set to slot 1 for now. Now we're just going to render our image by going to render, render image, or by hitting F12 on your keyboard. Okay, so my render is done, and we can notice already that all of the colors and everything look great, but we'll also notice that the fur looks pretty dark and almost like it would be rough to the touch. It doesn't look particularly soft. This is due to each hair casting shadows on the surfaces beyond them and the hair next to them. All of these shadows add up and make for a much darker appearance that gives it a lot more contrast around each hair. This is why we're getting areas like here around the eyes and on the side of the face that are just really dark. We're going to use a setting that allows us to remove the shadows from the fur to help get rid of some of this excess darkness and the rough look. So first we'll go over here to the layout workspace. And then over here, we're going to go to the Object Properties tab found on the right. It's this orange square icon. Now we'll scroll down this list until we find the section called visibility, and then we'll go further down the list until we see ray visibility. And then we'll notice this checkbox here called shadow. We're going to uncheck this shadow box, making sure that you have the short fuzz selected. So make sure that you have this object selected before you uncheck this box, so that we're not unchecking the shadows for another object. This will tell Blender to not allow the fuzz to cast any shadows. Now that we've made this change, let's go back to our rendering workspace, and then we're going to switch it to slot 2 up here at the top, just so we can render a different image without overwriting the first one. And now we can go to render, render image. And with that simple change, we can now see that we've removed all of that excess shadowing and roughness that we saw earlier, while still retaining a soft and fuzzy look for the fox. That's overall just a lot brighter and more cheerful. You can see a difference between these by just switching the slot back to slot 1, and we can see how much of a difference it made in the overall look of the render. And now we can also take a moment to appreciate the fact that all of these hairs are also colored the right color based on the surface that they're attached to. So we have white fuzz where we expect it, and orange fuzz where we expect it. All of this short fuzz is looking great at this point, but we're not quite done yet. In the next lesson, we'll add an additional layer of longer fuzz to our fox model. I'll see you there.